Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed. My knees are drenching in the blood I feel just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. My lonely way. I never pray to God anymore. I'd rather no one hurt me. Redemption, I have waited for you to come and drown all my sin. My knees are drenching in the blood I feel just to get here. When I look around me, everything I had went up in flames. I don't wanna fight anymore. Just turn around and leave me. The tear in my eye drops on the floor alongside my speed. My knees are drenching in the blood I feel just to get here. When I
There we are. Okay, still getting used to the layout of OBS. I've been using the Twitch um, streaming software, and they ended it. Or well, I don't know. It might still be usable, but they stopped support for it. So I decided to switch over to OBS. So anyway, here we go. We're on chapter 15 of the Cloven Tree. There are 20 pages, or 20 pages, 20 chapters. So that tells you where we're at. And this one is a fairly long chapter, if I remember right. Yeah, 27 pages ish. All right, let's jump into it. So this one is titled The Ninth Lord. Owen dreamt as he fought the sickness. He dreamt of death, pain, and agony. Trolls passed before his eyes, and fen trolls. Orcs riding fen worms paraded before him. Then he was back on the day that the sons of Mr. Garrison had brought their father's body out of the swamps. In his dream, the one-armed corpse opened its eyes, looked at Owen, and said, "Do not give up." Dragons were fresh and new and were ravaging across the world. Giants were being felled right and left by the enslaved war races of the Banelord. Demons warred with angels, wardens. Owen realized even in his fever dream. Wardens, Owen realized even in his fever dream. Okay. The angels were losing, and one of their greatest captains was cut off, surrounded by an army of his former brothers. As they tore him apart, the captain shouted, "Do not give up." Mountains rose before his mind's eye, great peaks, flashing with power from what could only be magical combat. Hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of drakes descended upon a single valley, and though thousands of them died, one of the ancient ones was slain. Another valley and another battle filled with power. Then only one of the ancient ones lived. The dragons gathered at the vale of the last Azani. He looked old, pathetic, and sad. Words that Owen could not hear were spoken, but it seemed that he was making a final plea. The drakes scoffed. The ancient was attacked. Within seconds, it seemed he would be overwhelmed, but dragons died wherever he gazed. "Do not give up," the small being shouted. Power emanated from him in massive bursts, and when Owen looked again, the dragon army was obliterated. Years passed before his eyes, and Owen could see a huge battle far to the east. Two great armies, both made of men, Cablants and legionnaires, fought each other next to a city on fire. The scene entered the city, and Owen saw a hideous demon battling a master mage of the undead there. The Lich King, the Banelord, Owen thought, as the two struggled mightily. The wight was thrown down by the Banelord, but when the demon stretched out to seize the corpse's power, it crumbled as he touched it, and so he gained nothing by his victory. Smiling as he slipped back into the realm of death, the Lich King spoke, "Do not give up." When Owen saw the battle of the lake, and men cowered as the legions approached them, then Owen saw it. The Iron King rode in front of his men, speaking words that Owen could not hear. Then the king seized his banner, charged right for the undead, and the army followed him. Above the battle, a powerful mage was wrestling with the same demon, and when the men charged, the mage achieved supremacy. Taking the demon, he bound him with many chains and hurled him to the east. Then the mage looked right at him and said, "Do not give up, Owen." Startled, Owen realized the fever dream was actually a message. "Remember your hunger. Turn now and look behind you," the mage said. Obeying, his eyes fell on the great tree of his vision, and so he woke. "Araman, where are we?" "Owen, the great Father be praised! I did not think that thou wouldst wake." "How long have I been asleep?" "2, no 3 days, methinks. Here, take this broth. Thou art undoubtedly famished. Slowly now." Owen felt stiff, nearly unmovable. Araman helped him lift his head, and he started sipping the broth. Once he began eating, he realized how hungry he truly was, and he had trouble pacing himself to Araman's direction. "Slowly, my friend. Thy stomach hath been empty for at least a day." He barely managed to hold back, and all too soon the cup was empty. He drank the water that Araman had also brought, and then restated his question. "Where are we?" "We are on the hill north of the switchback, unto the southern race. The orcs from the fortress achieved a coup de main. They have secured the switchback to our spite. We are dug in and waiting for the enemy, who we are certain doth follow us south from the fort." "What do we do now?" "We wait. We failed to send the book, to keep it from the enemy. Hopefully reinforcements shall arrive with enough equipment to bridge the gap between here and the ridge north of the race. But we expect the legionnaires to arrive beforehand. Now return to thy rest, Owen. No, help me stand. Reluctantly, the elf offered his assistance, and with some difficulty, born of stiffness, Owen stood. Eroman handed Owen a pole to help support him. Gratefully, Owen nodded. Then he recognized it. This is Mage Wilmer's. He died, did he not? Yes, we used his staff in thy litter, as he would not mind. My memories are murky, dim. How many of us died? 8 of the mission team perished in the fort, he explained the situation briefly. The orcs have undead among them. So they can communicate with the other undead when they're close enough, right? Wearily, the elf nodded. Is there any more food? I feel hungrier than ever. Leaning on the staff, Owen hobbled up toward the top of the hill, Eroman hovering behind him to his left. They came to the makeshift framework raised next to the ledge that held a few of the wounded, and Eroman parted the blankets that had been hanging from this framework. We placed them to minimize the noise from the rest of the hill, Eroman said. He vaguely remembered wagons from before, but now he saw only 5 wagons and battlements. There were 2 sets of walls, one on the east of the hill and one on the west. In the center were a number of fires and palisade stakes dug into the ground. Interspersed among these were odd-looking bundles of poles, usually tied together in groups of 3 or 4, a type of barricade formation called a wooden sentinel. He saw... Oh, are we in a ad? I think we are. All right, I'll pause for a second. Okay. Not quite. I'll wait until the ad finishes here. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Okay. It says we're back. He saw 4 small forts set in a line on the hilltop, line from east to west. Cook fires were all over, it seemed, and Owen saw people everywhere. Slaves freed from the fortress, Eroman said, answering his question before he could ask it. It was a beehive of activity. Stacks of weapons were everywhere, being sorted and piled in each little fort. Other people were at each fire, and Owen realized most were work fires. He saw slaves boiling rags with water or weak wine. He saw slaves emptying bones of marrow to melt the fat. He saw the people hardening wood and bones in fires, and by them were slaves trying to carve and polish animal skulls into helmets or make frames for shields to cover with animal hides. Other slaves were rapidly sewing clothes and boots from hides that hadn't been fired for very long. He saw some bagging and piling bags of dirt, and some polishing shoulder blades into axe heads. Oh, okay. Some were carving molds to pour melted metal into to mount on axe heads. Others were melting scraps of metal to pour in them, ones they'd not found uses for elsewhere. Both of these were going far too slowly, but faster than Owen would have believed possible. More folk were trying to carve and fletch arrows, as others continued to sort piles of weapons. Others were pouring melted oils into earthen jars and adding what Owen realized were precious soaps into them with rags for fuses. More soap than Owen had ever seen in one place. Some were even boiling blood. In case the undead decide to burn our fortifications, blood can extinguish flame as well as water, Eroman said. They crossed from the south side, heading toward the cook fire that was presently the command post. Owen looked at the sun and judged that less than 2 hours remained before noon. Maybe only 1, he thought. They walked by a group of freed slaves to whom Braster was giving a quick and dirty training course on how to fight. Owen, fully conscious for the first time since he had thrown the anvil at Brask, noticed that Kindra was one of Braster's students. Without thinking, he blurted, "You are going to teach her to fight? Battles are no place for a girl." Braster snorted. "A battle is no place for anyone, Owen, and what should she do? Sit there and let them cut her throat? Besides, we will need everyone if we are to survive the coming fight." "Right," Owen apologized. "Sorry," he said to the red-headed girl in her bulky, oversized clothes. She stood up, and Owen was able to see her for the first time with clear senses. She was not really a girl, but a young woman, 27 perhaps, though she looked younger. Her garments were not oversized at all, but merely loose when she'd been sitting down. She was as tall as Owen and nearly as wide at the shoulder, though her musculature was nowhere near as thick. "No place for a girl," she quoted. "You wouldn't say that had you been a slave." "I am sorry," he said, blushing. "I have been sick," he said by way of explanation. After having said it, he felt foolish. The explanation sounded weak, even to him. She looked at him oddly and said, "I know you've been sick. Otherwise, I'd actually have been offended." Red-faced, he started on toward the main fire, with Araman following him as he leaned upon the staff. When they arrived at the main party, the commanders stopped their discussion for a moment. As Otherin came to examine him, the examination was brief. "How art thou walking, Owen? Thou dost feel touched and nearly taken by death." "I woke. I feel rather better. Famished, but I am not sick any more." The mages startled over that, and then subtly exchanged knowing looks. Owen, however, was alert and caught the glances. "I take it that is not a good sign? Why?" "A legionnaire has no need for food. The sickness attacks the stomach first. As long as the stomach is nauseous, the sickness does not have you yet," Sergeant Wilmer said for the wizards. "Of course, if you beat it, you'll not be sick either." "Still, Owen, you need your rest. Go back to sleep," Arnest said. "No, if I sleep again, I think I will die. Besides, I want to see the book. I think I have earned a look." They could not argue that, and Leleburn pointed to a stump. The book was 3 inches thick, but only about 8 inches wide, seemingly sized to fit into a large pocket or small pouch. After Owen examined it for a moment, Tilder took it, and using a small hatchet, cut the back binding off of it, then the covers, placing the pages on the stump. He then began to hack through it, chopping the paper to pieces. "It seems to have been a separate volume from the one we took from the lair," he noted idly. "Why it is letting me chop it, I do not know. Not after it did not let us send it to the other hill. I will attempt to burn it, Captain," he said to Leleburn. "But given how the other book protected me from the dragon's blaze, I doubt it shall take to flame." "If it doth not burn, then we shall destroy it by the other means," the elf replied, briefly gesturing to a steaming pot. This reminded Owen. "Can I have some more food? I am hungry. In fact, I feel starving." Wilmer and Oxbow brought Owen another pot and a large skin of water. "Why are we trying to destroy it?" "We cannot let it return to enemy hands," Wilmer replied. "Too many of us have died just to bring it this far, and we should not send it across. And we could not send it across." He gestured to the relief platoon on the southern hill. Owen grunted, but did not otherwise reply as he began attacking the stew with a will. His father brought him a small loaf of bread. It seemed small to Owen's famished stomach. He fell out of the conversation as the commanders of the mission returned to the options that they had. Owen listened, scanning the camp as he devoured the soup and bread, taking huge pulls on the flagon of water when he needed a drink. Tilder proved right. Owen noted Owen noted as he listened to the conversation. The book would not burn. The dwarf threw the diced pages into the other pot and began stirring it. Not one of the freed slaves noticed his actions. Owen saw that none of them had been in earshot during the conversation. Or as in earshot, he realized. That was what Aldemar was doing, making sure that no one not part of the mission knew what was happening. Looking north, he saw that the dwarves were doing the same, while preparing defenses, and he realized that Braster had been as well. Looking at the east, he saw Curtis busy with some task, instructing more freed slaves in combat, assisted by hot hands. They were training the slaves, but they were also keeping the book secret from them. Wilmer went to Aldemar, and the mage came back up the hill. Seeing Owen, he decided to come to him instead of to the knot of commanders 5 feet away, 5 feet over. Don't overdo it, Owen. You have not had solid food for half a week. I am simply munching. I have not eaten much, Owen replied, idly, still looking around him as he listened to the commanders and watched the activity. Munching? You have eaten a third of that stew. That pot was full 5 minutes ago. Sit still. Let me see if the sickness is breaking. Surprised, Owen realized that the wizard was right. Consciously, he paced his eating over the next few minutes as the mage examined him. Otherin looked to see where Aldemar had gone. Seeing him examining Owen, he turned back to the conversation. They talked of plans and what Hlemiok was with the legions, but Owen soon found that he could barely concentrate upon their talk, for the more he ate, the more he wanted to eat, and he could not quench the hunger. Soon he stopped pacing himself and fell to, the food seeming to dissolve the moment he swallowed it. Soon the stew was gone, with the loaf as well, but Owen barely felt that he had eaten at all. Part of that is natural, Owen, Aldemar explained when Owen asked him about it. You went berserk in the castle battle, and you have only had broth since then. Part of it is the distemper, but if you hold it off for a while longer, you should overcome it. How much longer? I do not know yet. I should when I am done. Owen again turned to the conversation that Lelebran, the two nobles, and the others were having. It does not appear to have worked, Tildor noted as he stopped his stirring. He came back from the other pot to the improvised table they were using as the center of the command post. The pages have dissolved into the stew, but the power of the object feels no less than before. The enemy would eventually find it, I think. What else can we do? Burn the soup? Smelt the pot? We're out of time, Therian said. We could feed it to the freed slaves and ourselves, Taurus noted, dubiously. Lelebran was adamantly against that. No, that would be immoral. The power of the book might kill whoever partook of it. To risk that without their knowledge would be iniquity. He is right, Master Taurus, Thames agreed. That we cannot do without them volunteering, and we cannot tell them why. We have held to secrecy so far. We cannot tell them why we came to the Killia if they have not found out already. Good news, Owen, Aldemar said. You will overcome the sickness naturally. You will merely have to rest for the next half a week. Aldemar was so distracted by Owen's relatively good condition that the absurdity of the prognosis did not strike him. Oxbow stressed as both a warrior and a father. Stressed as what? Let him have it. Just how in all hell is he supposed to do that, Master Aldemar? We're going to be fighting corpse men this afternoon. Owen stepped forward, putting a hand on his father's shoulder, and the old man settled down. Owen felt nearly as angry as his father, but he knew it was not Aldemar's fault, nor the fault of anyone here. When he spoke, he changed the subject slightly. So we are trapped, have legionnaires following us, and we cannot rescue the book. We cannot destroy it, and if they are the same group of legionnaires who captured Curtis and Didoran, They may have a flesh demon with them. You have managed to hide the fact that we have the book from the slaves that we freed, but if I succumb to the distemper, then the enemy will find the stew, and we cannot feed the stew to the slaves, so it might kill them. Is that correct? Several of them nodded, realizing for the first time that Owen would know. If he were turned to the legions, Owen went on. Kind of rough in there, I'm not sure. Um, if we broke the power up, that is, fed it to several different people, then the legionnaires might have an easier time seizing that power. So we are out of choices. What would you have us do, Owen? Taurus asked. Kill you to prevent their secret from being learned? We are played out. Owen's stomach growled, and he thought that they must have heard it, though no one seemed to but him. Remember your hunger, the dream. Remember your hunger, the dream, the unnamed mage had said. He put his hand on his stomach and grimaced. Then he answered the question. No, I do have an idea, perhaps one that will take care of more than one problem. He stepped to the pot that held the dissolved book, now hungrier than ever. Before anyone could react, he seized and brought it to his lips, taking huge gulps of the stew. Owen, no! Aldemar and Oxbow both shouted. They stepped toward him, but Otherin grabbed their arms. The damage, be there any, hath already been done. Still hungrier than with every bite, Owen gulped the stew, hardly chewing at all. His hands started to burn on the pot, and his head started to rush from its heat, but he kept eating. Halfway through it, he started to feel the change, and his hunger began to subside. Still he ate, consuming the stew and the book with it, making sure that this hunger never returned. Finally, when just a thin layer of broth was left, he set it back down, nearly fainting from it. Tilder steadied him, and Owen took the flagon of water the dwarf offered, pouring as much on his face, head, and hands as he did down his throat. Then he heard what they were saying. Why, Owen? Because I am dead anyway, and I doubt that the Legion's sickness is stronger than the Glee Sage's. This way we have removed the book, and by heaven, now I am no longer hungry. He smiled, then he screamed as the book truly began warring with the undead taint. He collapsed. And it looks like it changes tacks here, changes to another group. You wish to begin the assault this afternoon? Despair asked questioningly. To him it made more sense to wait for darkness and assault the missionaries when they would be most disposed to sleep. Braun had, in fact, considered this, but ended up rejecting it. Yes, Lord Despair, it is to our advantage to finish this matter quickly. I have considered all the advantages and disadvantages. I am confident in my decision. I must admit that your reasoning is beyond me, the flesh demon said, in candid opposition to the idea. Braun's sergeant major spoke. Lord Despair, in war the unexpected is more deadly than what you have prepared against. Daylight assaults are more rare than not. It also reduces the time that they have to prepare defenses. They will prepare them well, even given a short time. Mages and battle mages all have mastery of fire, but fire is among the native magic of dwarves. Every hour we wait, 100 new weapons are made from dwarf-sparked fires, swords, axes, oil flasks, and fireworks, depending on their supply state, which is not negligible. They can entrench nearly as rapidly. Their earthworks will hamper even us. There are enough elves, dwarves, and half-breeds in that group to minimize the advantage of our night vision. Also, there are many moral reasons that speak for morale reasons that speak for a daylight assault. I will not bore you with them. No, tell me. I would learn all that I can while I am here. The undead sergeant gave a bowing nod. The effect upon their morale will be greater if we start the battle during the day and it lasts into the night. They'll see the full magnitude of our power. Corpses that are beheaded, run through, and quartered, they will see reformed to come against them again. Veteran troops quail at that sight. Unseasoned troops quite often break. There is one particular matter as well. Men are more likely to ignore a fire during the day than they are at night. They will have fires prepared, but the slaves will be far from proficient with it. They'll ignore it or expend it too quickly. It takes quite a blaze to kill one of us. The demon harumphed, and Braun dismissed his ancient sergeant. I had not thought of that, Despair said. It is odd to me, fearing fire. I cannot imagine a flame that would harm me unless it was by Wraith or the Bone Lord himself. The ancient Glee sages could use it to harm a Hlemiok, some of the most powerful of them, like Oli. There was a man that could stand against nearly anything. I miss those days. Things were much more challenging. Braun dwelled in reverie for a few moments before Despair almost diffidently interrupted. It surprises me that you let an underling of yours know so much of your plans, particularly one of such rank. He is the least expendable of my subordinates. In some ways I am more expendable. He has been with me since the beginning. He has more experience than all my officers combined and is a most excellent scout. He was with me at the Battle of the Lake when William of the Irons took 4 of our banners. He held the rear guard and so much more throughout the span of his career. I would be an idiot if I rejected his counsel. So what he said was accurate? Yes. My main reason for haste is that the enemy will be reinforced, possibly with even a battalion strength command. We would lose both the tome and the takers of it. The King's Guard will reinforce them, or they are not the King's Guard, unless the orcs we turned out elsewhere are very fortunate. As if his words had made it happen, a legionnaire came up to report. He swiftly saluted and spoke. My lord, the golems left behind have collapsed. Braun smiled evilly. Spread the word. I wish to be fully engaged with them by the 3rd hour of the afternoon. Most of the defenses that the missionaries raised had comparatively little utility for fighting the undead, but then most of the battles with the undead were open field combat. Fixed defensive battles normally were where heavy regiments of goblins, orcs, haborks, and stone trolls were used. The defenders were improvising, hoping that the various trenches, ditches, and palisades that they had built would slow them and break their formation up, making each legionnaire more vulnerable. Behind these, they had 3 lines of defense, with the main redoubts in the center line. Only the swiftest would be in the first line, which had been made with the expectation of being lost. They could only properly prepare one line in the time they had. The third line was an emergency position. The ballistae and small catapults they had were on or behind the middle line and would be used only when they would achieve maximum effect. The plan of the defenders was very simple. Keep the enemy off of the hill as long as possible, causing as much damage with fire and wizardry as possible. Once the undead achieved the hill, they did not expect to be able to hold them off it indefinitely. They would abandon the first line, drawing them to the main defenses, and hopefully hampering their ability to maneuver. Form up and react since they would be between 2 rows of obstacles. The freed slaves behind the defenses would try to pin them down, led by some of the soldiers. The largest group of the missionaries would, in different squads, try to find the captain of the Legion Company and kill him. This was essential. A long history of war showed that it was impossible to destroy a bannered company to take its standards without killing its captain. Oh, we have somebody that... Benneth. I am reading The Cloven Tree. It is a novel that someone I know wrote. It's pretty interesting so far. Sour Whiz. I am doing great. Thank you for asking. Thank you for coming in. Um, Sturgio can it. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Expose. Let's see. I'm gonna just go from here without killing the captain. That's where I was. Okay. The mages would stay in a central redoubt behind the first line, with two segments of the freed slaves on either side. To the left of that, on the western side of the hill, were the most kind of lost my flow here, sorry. To the left of that, on the western side of the hill, were the most makeshift of the defenses. A couple of walls of spears and stakes in front of the small wall made from wagon planks. Across the center front, the first line was just ditches, trenches, mounds, and dug-in stakes. This was to tempt the enemy to charge right into the teeth of the defenses, exposing their flanks. Curtis and Wilmer would themselves be in charge of the center. Curtis to the right of the mages, and Wilmer to the left. Braster was given the strongest fortifications on the eastern side of the hill. Here they had built the strongest redoubt from wagon wood and the stones of the hill. They put a large concentration of slaves here, hoping the defenses would keep them from breaking. The best fort overall, however, was the spur itself. Lellebran decided to defend it because it was the highest point, and from it the enemy captain could command a view of the entire hilltop. By denying it to him, his view would be much more limited. This also had the added benefit of tempting the enemy to split his forces. Oxbow and Tilder would hold their natural redoubt, and the two of them had nearly gone rabid in their preparations. The narrow rockiness of the spur made it ideal for defense, and they only had to move and brace a few rocks to form elevated walls that the legionnaires would have a most difficult time scaling. To this they added caltrops, oiled rocks, rocks that were prepared to roll, a few other tricks, and a small arsenal of axes, hammers, and other weapons. When all but the least important preparations were done, Curtis inspected the line. Lellebran asked him to do it, knowing that despite his wealthy birth, the old alcoholic had a disarming way about him, and the sergeant's eye for detail was unmatched. Excuse me. Most important of all, his presence would calm them, where whereas if any of the officers did it, it could only be an inspection. Stand easy, my boy. I'm only here to help you. Have you ever used a sword before? Curtis asked one of the slaves, a boy of about 15. No, sir, came the reply. Just hammers, axes, and shovels. Curtis let the incorrect title pass without a flinch. Then you already know how to use a sword. When you swing it like an axe, putting your shoulders into it. Whether you swing it sideways or up and down. When you thrust with it, put all your weight behind it like you do with a shovel. You're just digging a post hole sideways. The boy nodded and seemed a little happier as Curtis moved on. What I'd really like is a hammer, Sergeant. Swords and spears don't seem of much use against men that died once already, another slave stated, a merchant captured in a raid. Yeah, so you'd think, and against out-and-out ghouls, you're right. They're slow, they don't think much, they've no weapons or armor, save their teeth and fangs, and they feel pain. So when you break their bones, it hurts them. This just ain't true of the Legion men, though. They wear armor, think, have great skill and endurance, and they don't care if you break their bones. They heal faster than a magicked newborn. Even if you do smash a joint, they might just keep standing or not drop the sword. No better a sword than no better a sword than a hammer. If you cut off the leg, the bone's still broken, and he'll fall over. Less he's got perfect balance. If you cut off the hand, the arm's broken, and you know he's dropped the sword. The freed merchant looked bashful, not having thought of those things, but Curtis slapped his shoulder in true camaraderie. Don't fret over it. Every man who trains for the King's Guard asks that, and you wouldn't believe how long it took us to realize. On he went, telling a man here to better place his feet for balance, showing a woman there how to better hold her sword. He distributed armed guards, helmets, extra axes, and knives wherever the stores liberated from the castle permitted, and he encouraged them to trade for better fits in armor, or for which sword would work better for each person. There weren't many changes, but Curtis's eye found them all, and the care he took made every person of the freed slaves to whom he spoke feel better. Spirits rose throughout the defenses. Some people were not easily settled, though. So, just really quickly, um, every chapter of this that I've read so far, and we're on chapter 15 tonight, is on my YouTube channel if you feel the need to go listen to it. Or buy the book. I'm sure my friend would greatly appreciate that. Back to it. Easy for you to say. You'll be wearing full armor, one man commented sourly, replying to Curtis's last piece of advice. Curtis ignored the insulting tone completely. Ah, full armor's overrated. It's heavy, hot, always stinks of 5 years' sweat, and means a long trip to the outhouse getting out of it, if you know what I mean. Several of the people around him laughed at that point. Curtis went on. It slows you down in a fight, too. Legionnaires are fast opponents. The freed slave thought he meant an insult by that, but Curtis blew past that as well. No, man, I ain't hintin' at you running away. If we could have run away, he said, pointing to the shrubs in the ravine that had trapped them, you'd have seen me in the first rank of the runners with no shame. Again the slaves laughed, including the man to whom Curtis was speaking, thinking he had made another joke. In fact, he had, but he was also telling the truth. Seeing that the tension was broken, Curtis went on, finishing the inspection. He made sure the ballistae crews were all well hidden as could be. He rearranged teams to sling oil jars on the undead, and at Wilmer's suggestion prepared teams to trap the undead right against forts with hidden ropes, while other teams ignited them by pouring molten steel or stomach acid on them, in case the undead extinguished their fuses. He made sure every one had at least 2 metal weapons, and that pinning stakes, crossbows, and bolt quivers were within 2 steps of each other. He spread the armor they'd stolen from the fort around. He made sure everyone had either metal armor, a shield, or several layers of hide clothing, and he made sure the women, boys, and half-elders had at least 1 adult man among each group, 2 when he could manage it. No, girl, he said to Kindra, if the men are all in one place, the undead'll just burn the other places up. They can only recruit boys who've started to look fondly at girls. By an hour after noon, little work remained to be done except wait for Braun and his command to arrive. Curtis and the other soldiers had the slaves whittle more stakes, of all lengths, principally to keep them busy. Lellebrun posted some sentries, who for the moment watched the orcs at the switchback. The western defenses were a bit more rudimentary than those on the eastern side of the hillock, so Thames had put most of the commandos there. Once the enemy was drawn onto the hill, the soldiers would try to flank the undead and drive for their captain, who most probably would be at the rear of the undead formation. The waiting seemed interminable, but nearly 3 hours after noon it finally ended. Here they come, the freed slave who had climbed up the tree shouted. The orcs are the legionnaires, Thames shouted back. The undead men, my lord, the reply came back. Throughout the hill, men swallowed in fear or let out a resigned sigh, but Curtis's shout cut through the silence. Stand to! Stand to! Stand to! And without question the soldiers resumed the positions they had relaxed from while waiting. The freed slaves followed their example. Now remember, Curtis said to the group of slaves positioned directly with him, team up as much as you can. Don't try to fence with them. Don't go for the body unless you're sword trained. Legionnaire body armor's main job is to trap blades. Cut off their hands, heads, and their feet to knock them down. Throw their heads into a fire and their whole bodies when you can. Barring that, pin them to the ground until we can burn them later. Once pinned, then stab him in the heart. No more time was given for instructions. The undead reached the gully, and Braun sent a squad into the reft to clear the obstructions that had been placed among its brambles. Oxbow put 3 arrows into a legionnaire before he had reached 20 feet. Braun sent another squad to try to reach Oxbow, and 7 missionaries ahead of the main defense line also started pouring arrows into the gully. These shafts, however, had been enchanted, and 3 of them exploded when they hit, obliterating their targets. The other 4, instead of exploding, sprouted, swiftly growing into bushes, shrubs, and in one case a young oak, and each plant growing through a legionnaire, feeding off and trapping them at once. More arrows flew from these 7 archers, and soon the southern knoll was virtually sealed off from the legionnaire's position by a huge hedge. That's pretty clever. I like that. Oxbow kept loosing arrows at the one legionnaire and 2 of his companions, but all the rest of the 2 squads were sealed in the newly overgrown gully. We've done for nearly a fifth of them already, Roran said, very excitedly. Wilmer knew better. The next 3/5 will be the hard ones. We'll have to take that many and their captain to break them. Hopefully the shrubs will slow them. But Braun was not going to let them have that respite. The undead captain thrust out his left hand, shouting a word no living man could speak. Like he was grabbing something unseen, he clenched his fist and brought his arm back in. Immediately the bond left the undead trapped in the shrubs. They turned to dust, the magical plants disintegrating with them. Then, to the shock of every one of the defenders, Braun spoke again, and the legionnaires in the gully reformed. "He can't do that," Roran said, horrified, and several of the mages nodded. "He did that," Wilmer said, with grim emphasis, "but at least some of them were killed. See, half a squad has not reformed." "He is adjusting the bond," Thames breathed from his position, with Lelebrin at the western defenses. "He is adjusting the bond like only a chief captain should. Only a full legion captain has that power." "Perhaps he hath commanded a legion, Banner," Lelebrin noted. "Some of them hath been reported to command banner companies at times." The young human lord paled at the comment. The legionnaires still in the gully pulled briars and brambles aside, uncovering and destroying as many of the traps there as they could. The defenders, especially the dwarves, felt little satisfaction at seeing these traps and pits they had made destroyed so methodically, and with so little impact on the enemy. "Not only is he powerful," Brander noted darkly, "he is no fool, this legionnaire captain," as he saw 2 of the undead free a 3rd from a bear pit. Oxbow had come to the same conclusion, having put most of his experimentally venomed arrows into 5 of the legionnaires. That quiver was now nearly empty. His crossbows, however, had not been used since the castle, and roughly 20 bolts remained. Grabbing one of the 3 crossbows that he still had, he sighted and loosed at the legion captain. As quickly as a striking snake, another legionnaire knocked Braun down and raised his shield. Like his sons, the older Macoan's bolts were designed for worm hunting. The crossbow quarrel punched through the undead's shield, nearly unimpeded. The legionnaire was smashed backwards 20 feet, his bones shattering as he hit a boulder. Taurus loosed next the bolt from his less powerful crossbow, missing Braun by inches as he ducked and rolled. The quarrel still strong enough to knock another legionnaire to the ground. Oxbow had reloaded the weapon he had used and again loosed. Taurus, his crossbows not having the quick tension release of the McCowan crossbow, turned to the simple expedient of handing each crossbow he used to a dwarf for reloading. They quickly put a dozen bolts at Braun by this means, nearly all of them knocking down other legionnaires. Braun soon had enough of this. Despair! Out from behind the last boulder on the trail, and Hlemiok came into the defender's sight. It was 9 feet tall, and with reptilian draconian wings growing from his upper back. His body looked vaguely human, but was utterly hairless. His skin seemed to change color with every thought, though mostly it shifted from the hue of a snail or slug to a bright dark red, then back. The red hue was like the darkest blood ever seen. His face was decidedly inhuman, even unhuman, with great fangs set in the jaws, 2 pairs of horns, one going straight out the sides of the top of his head, the other curving forward like elephant tusks, detracted significantly from any human resemblance. The ring of horns protruding from his neck, looking like a horrible necklace of teeth, also shouted the demon's inhumanity, but it was his eyes that proved forever that this horror was no kin to any race of Angea. Completely white and with pupils slitted diagonally, they were like no eye naturally occurring, but it was the look of them that drove fear into the soul. Pride seethed from those eyes, and power, with an arrogance that dared to judge creation and found it wanting. Fire, slavery, and torment the eyes promised, and they were absolutely devoid of mercy. As if to further put him above mortals, the Hlemiok was riding a small dragonling. With a peremptory command to his 40-foot-long, clipped-wing mount, the demon halted and dismounted, while 2 more bolts were shot at Braun. In a motion so fast it seemed that he only flexed, the Hlemiok drew a whip and flicked the quarrels from the air. His motion was full of fluidic grace, and only the resounding explosions of air as each quarrel was destroyed betrayed the power of the demon's whip. Owen again dreamt of a tree and awoke. His... Okay. So Owen is sleeping? Again? Again? During the battle? Okay. Owen again dreamt of a tree and awoke. His dreams had been nightmares of evil overrunning the fens at home and enslaving his family. While he was chained, he could do nothing. Shaking, he buried his face in his hands to weep, sobbing so hard that soon his gut ached. This pain drew his attention to his physical condition, and his weeping halted in shock. He felt better than he could ever remember, and the great pangs of legion sickness were gone, the memory of them fading in how wholesome he felt now. He remembered drinking the stew, and suddenly, as if the remembrance was the opening of a great gate, words filled him like water filling a dry lake bed. Songs, sagas, poems, many of them not said or sung for nearly 1,000 centuries, filled his mind unbidden, and his vision swam as he started looking about. Everywhere he looked, at the sky, the earth, the sun, the horizon, he saw not just what was there, but how each interacted to be part of the whole. Power he saw, and the laws that demanded that the aspects of existence work so intricately, so intimately that with each other that on the surface they must appear to be chaos. He could see the wind, he could smell sunlight, at least how it changed and warmed the air to bring life, and he could taste what governed the color of the sky. He laughed. He was alive. The nightmares he had just had were only that, and he knew everything. Laughing, he said, "Of course I do not know everything, but now I really know how much I did not know before, so in that sense I do. Yes, but no." He laughed again at the contradiction, feeling it fitting and ridiculous at the same time. 3 more explosions abruptly brought him short. He remembered hearing explosions in his dreams just before he woke, and this was the same sound. The battle, he breathed to himself, amazed that he had forgotten that. Quickly he searched for his gear, wondering where his crossbows had gone, when his eyes fell on the orc sword and Wilmer's staff. He wanted to weep for the death of his comrades, all forgotten in his sickness. Not now, Owen's son, not now. He grabbed the sword by the loose-fitting scabbard and belted it on. Then, taking the wizard's staff, he used it for a walking stick. For though he was now well, he was still stiff from his days of motionlessness. Slowly he walked to the crest of the hill. At first, the line of men, elves, and dwarves on the battlements blocked his sight. When he looked beyond them, his new vision was profoundly offended. He could see the power of the bond in each legionnaire, how the natural cycle of death had been denied for each of them. Some of them seemed viler than others in his eyes, and one was especially foul, so foul that Owen at once knew him to be their commander. The Hlemiok, however, was by far the worst to look upon. The legionnaires, even their captain, it seemed, were only diversions of the natural order, allowing them to continue to exist in a void. Compared to the demon, they were as natural as a tree limb casting a shadow. The Hlemiok was a wildfire of abomination against the sparks of the legionnaires. Its existence was not a loophole, but an absolute defiance, a defiance that flouted nearly all the laws Owen could see, one whose very existence screamed of the power needed to maintain itself. Two more quarrels flew, and again the monstrosity destroyed them with its whip. A word of utter rebuke came to Owen's mind, but something of what he had learned told him that it was not yet time to use it. Then he saw the riding drake, a full-blooded dragon that might have been a powerful worm before the demon had destroyed it. Worse, the blood of the beast was nearly half true to the ancient blood of the Azani. Searching his now nearly omnipotent vocabulary, Owen began muttering a weird, combining what he had learned from the book and with what Taurus had taught him of dragon tongues. Despair decided to end. It switched to Despair, the demon. Despair decided to end the standoff. He did not want to give them time to adjust, especially the wizards, and he had become bored with the display of power that he was putting forth. He dismounted. I thought he'd already dismounted, but whatever. And with a thought, unleashed the restraints he had put upon his hideous presence, letting his sheer malevolence wash the defenders in desolation. "I am the ninth Lord Despair," he shouted. "Feel my presence, and give me homage by letting fear fill you." Whelmed by a blast of hopelessness, the defenders staggered. Most of them fell to their knees, though those who were not too frightened to do even that. The mages withstood it, though some of them swooned. Braun smiled, for this went as he hoped the battle would. For if this went as he hoped, the battle would be over before it began. It would not be very entertaining, but... Suddenly the demon screamed in agony and rage as the riding drake, its mind now fully awakened to how it had been mutilated, attacked its rider with flame, talon, tooth, and tail. The demon was overborne, and Braun set an undead squad upon the beast. Crazed and damaged to the very soul, the worm was distracted from its target by the undead, and in truth it could not destroy Despair. The undead squad was savaged, with 9 of them blasted to flinders. But the diversion worked. Despair drew a sword, driving it effortlessly through the beast's hide and skull, killing it instantly. Enraged by the assault, Despair pivoted again to face the defenders, who had been released from their terror by the worm's assault. "That hurt, and you shall all pay for the impertinence of your mages," he roared, whelming them again with his presence, paying special attention to focus it upon the wizards. Wanting the supreme effect, he began to expand his body to colossal heights, wreathing himself in darkness and fire even as he grew. He poured his dread upon them, heightening it again and again until even some of the undead were quaking. With a now calamitous voice that resounded like the thunder of every hell he blasted them with his mightiest strength. You shall pay! The magnitude of the cacophony was sufficient to physically knock some of them down, and they were all cowed, except Owen. As the terror of the flesh demon grew, so did his outrage at the being's perversion, and he weathered the blast like a mountain in a storm. Without hesitation, nearly without thought, he gathered the power he had been bequeathed by the book, and holding in both hands the staff he had inherited from Wilmer, he pointed it at the now titanic demon. With a voice that resonated with resolute righteousness, he shouted his might back at the 100-foot-high Lemioc. Hippocrates! His voice resounded, freeing the defenders from their desolation, and the wizards knew in that instant that the nearly forgotten, long-debated word of reprimand had been spoken perfectly, with absolute balance of power and inflection, and it was burned into their hearts. The authority Owen unleashed did not stop at that, for it was beyond scope. Even as Mage Wilmer's staff was annihilated by the might unleashed through it, the rebuke hit Despair. With his power still being released for the attack, the demon was defenseless. The force Owen released elevated the word from an accusation to more than an indictment, verdict, and death sentence. Despair could not even bring his own body with him, for it reached the level of exorcism. Hurtling from the scene at a velocity that only a spirit could attain, let alone endure, he nearly passed through the blockade of demons that the Banelord had sealed around Angia at the beginning of the First Age. Dozens of the blockades were required to halt him. Quickly they realized him to be one of their brethren of flesh. Despair smiled, knowing that they knew him to be an ally, and not one of the few life wardens remaining. His shock was therefore total when they decided to devour him. One of them explained, "You are vulnerable and we are hungry. We are demons after all." And they started in to feed. And that is actually the end of that chapter, which was a pretty cool chapter. I mean, once you got past the making the defenses, getting into the battle, I mean, he writes battles pretty damn well. Some of the other stuff is, it's filler. I mean, it's okay, but it's kind of not real exciting. But when he gets to battle, man, he's got it. So his name is Chris Holmquist. I'll put this up there. It's under C.S. Holmquist. The Cloven Tree. It's available on Amazon, and I think he's got a website where it's available too. If you just look up the Cloven Tree. Yeah, I'm liking it so far. It starts out a little slow though. But that will be that for this week. I can only manage one chapter a reading. My voice starts to go. So that'll be that. I'm going to see, let's see, who's around. Well, we've got Vesper. We've got Mr. Blitzer. Who have I not rated in a while? I rated Ren Flames and Alyosha recently. Hot Dog Raw Dog the other night. Let's go to Mr. Blitzer. So he is playing Red Dead Redemption 2. So we'll head on over there, and I'll see you in a couple minutes.
calling to say I